Before the first arrow flew, before the city walls fell, names were already written in ink. Girls marked, catalogued, and destined for horrors no history book fully admits. 8 centuries later, 16 million men carry the genetic proof of what was planned with chilling precision. This is the story of how an empire turned systematic rape into a weapon of conquest, leaving scars written in DNA. The city of Damascus in 1220 was waking to a quiet morning, unaware that its fate had been calculated long before the first Mongol horse appeared on the horizon. Merchants opened their shops, arranging saffron, silk, and copper vessels. Children ran barefoot across stone streets, and women leaned from latticed windows, calling greetings to their neighbors. Life, as always, carried the illusion of normalcy. Yet beneath the familiar rhythm of the city, the wheels of a far more sinister system had already begun to turn. 2 years earlier, before the first scouts had ridden past the city gates, intelligence networks had been activated. Men posing as traders, pilgrims, or scholars moved among the streets, quietly observing. Their eyes measured more than height or posture. They noted family histories, the number of children born and surviving, and subtle signs of fertility, endurance, and genetic resilience. Whispers from bathhouses, midwives' confidences, and seemingly idle conversations at bazaars were meticulously logged. These spies were not there to steal riches, disrupt trade, or sow rebellion. Their mission was calculated, bureaucratic, and far more personal: to catalog human bodies. Fatima al-Rashid, a girl of 14, was already marked in the administrative ledger long before soldiers ever breached Damascus's walls. The morning she would be dragged from her home, she pressed herself against the cool stone of her courtyard wall, dark eyes wide and frightened, the echo of her mother's screams cutting through the air. But the horror wasn't just the boots on the cobblestones. It was the ledger that preceded the soldiers, ink still fresh, her name already decided, already assessed, already assigned. Height, lineage, fertility indicators, each entry a calculated projection of reproductive value. In the cold bureaucracy of the Mongol Empire, Fatima's humanity was secondary to her biological worth. Across the city, similar scenes played out in perfect synchronization. Doors were kicked open, names were called, and girls were led with terrifying efficiency to administrative tents, where the Mongol officers assigned breeding quotas with the same precision as grain rations. Each ledger recorded outcomes with mechanical detachment: age, processing date, fertility status, assigned location, pregnancy results, and even compliance levels. For the administrators, the girls were not citizens, daughters, or individuals. They were data points, human stock in a system that transformed conquest into a long-lasting genetic legacy. The intelligence network extended far beyond Damascus. In Baghdad, Bukhara, Samarkand, and countless other cities across Persia and Central Asia, spies moved silently through society, collecting the same vital information. In every bathhouse, workshop, and marketplace, gossip was noted and catalogued. Midwives reported family fertility histories. Local merchants shared observations of youth, health, and temperament. Even marriage negotiations were quietly monitored. For 2 years, these spies integrated themselves into communities, earning trust while systematically cataloging human lives. The Mongol administrators would later use this intelligence to determine precisely which homes to raid and which girls to assign, guaranteeing the genetic success of their conquest. The scale of this operation was staggering. By the time a Mongol army rode through a city, administrators already knew who would be taken, who could bear children, and who had the physical resilience to survive repeated pregnancies. The process was measured with brutal efficiency. Administrators recorded processing times, mortality rates, and the reproductive output of each woman. They developed quotas and performance metrics. Punishments for failure or resistance were documented alongside rewards for exceeding targets. The empire had built a system where sexual violence was no longer chaotic or spontaneous. It was infrastructure, complete with metrics, optimization strategies, and supply chains. When the caravans moved, they carried not just supplies or soldiers, but mobile processing units. Archaeological evidence later revealed that some Mongol columns stretched for miles, with covered wagons repurposed as temporary facilities for their human cargo. Within these wagons, the women were confined and processed, moved along with mechanical efficiency. Pregnancy was monitored, deliveries were timed, and surviving offspring were catalogued for their genetic potential. The system allowed the Mongols to maintain a continuous supply of fertile women, even as the army advanced across thousands of miles, integrating sexual violence into the logistics of war itself. Meanwhile, outside this administrative nightmare, life for the ordinary residents of the cities continued, seemingly oblivious. The daughters of merchants dreamed of marriage, apprentices practiced their craft, and families prepared for festivals. None of them knew that for some girls the future had already been calculated, encoded in ledgers, carried along secret caravan routes, and destined to leave a mark not only on their lives, but on the DNA of generations yet to come. Even centuries later, the echoes of this bureaucratic cruelty are visible in the genetic record. DNA studies show that approximately 16 million men across Asia and Europe carry a direct paternal line, tracing back to Genghis Khan and his immediate descendants. Each marker represents not just survival, but the coordinated, systematic, and unrelenting exploitation of women, a reproductive conquest unprecedented in human history. The ledgers, once preserved in secret, were later corroborated by archaeological evidence. Mass graves of young women, tools for birthing and pregnancy, and the remains of mobile administrative tents along Mongol trade routes. Fatima al-Rashid's story, like thousands of others, was not chaos. It was infrastructure. Each scream, each ledger entry, and each administrative decision was a note in a horrifying symphony of conquest. While history often remembers the battles, the empires, and the kings, the quiet, methodical exploitation of women's bodies was the true engine of the Mongol genetic legacy. By the time the soldiers had finished their morning tasks in Damascus, dozens of girls had been relocated, catalogued, and assigned, their names now part of a vast, continent-spanning record. The administrators returned to their ledgers, quills scratching, counting, and planning the next stage of their systematic operation. In the cold light of the morning, the city continued its routines, unaware that their streets had already been mapped in a blueprint of horror, that their daughters were now part of a program designed to extend an empire not only by sword but by womb. This was the setup, a network of spies, ledgers, administrators, and mobile caravans, all orchestrating one of the most systematic campaigns of sexual violence in history. To understand how 16 million men today carry evidence of this infrastructure, one must first understand the scale, precision, and detachment of the Mongol reproductive program, a mechanism of power that began quietly in marketplaces and bathhouses, yet extended to every conquered city in the empire. The sun had climbed higher, and Damascus's streets were filled with the echo of boots, the clatter of doors being kicked open, and the terrified cries of girls dragged from their homes. Fatima al-Rashid clutched at her mother's sleeve, but the soldiers were relentless. There was no negotiation, no plea that could alter the bureaucratic precision of their mission. Each girl was already a number, a column in the ledger, a calculation of reproductive potential. In the administrative tents on the outskirts of the city, Mongol officers and scribes moved with mechanical efficiency. Names were called, measurements taken, fertility indicators noted, and assignments made. Fatima's mother tried to resist, lunging at the soldiers, but it was futile. Her horror deepened when she realized the ledger already bore her daughter's entry. Status processed, destiny predetermined. There was no chaos here, only the terrifying order of an empire built on human calculus. Elsewhere, caravans stretched for miles, wagons packed with girls and women captured from multiple cities, some already pregnant, some too young to understand the magnitude of what awaited them. Inside, the administrators recorded every detail: who had delivered children, who had miscarried, who resisted, who complied. Each outcome was logged and compared, the data feeding into an empire-wide system designed to optimize reproductive output. Resistance was met with escalating punishments: isolation, deprivation, or reassignment to the military brothels. Compliance brought small privileges, but never freedom. The Mongols' mobile units moved like clockwork behind the army, ensuring that the reproductive machine operated continuously. Girls were transferred from one wagon to the next, pregnant women sent to stationary facilities for safer delivery, infants marked and catalogued for future military or breeding assignments. The hum of the caravan, the creaking wheels, and the muffled sobs became a rhythm of terror that accompanied the empire's expansion. For Fatima, each passing day brought the crushing weight of inevitability. The first nights in the processing tent blurred into one another. Faces, names, cries, and the cold efficiency of the Mongol bureaucrats became her new reality. The girls whispered to one another in hushed tones, clinging to fragments of hope, small gestures of comfort, and memories of their families. Yet every moment reinforced the scale of the operation. This was no random act of violence, but a meticulously planned system designed to strip them of autonomy, turning bodies into instruments of imperial conquest. At night, the caravans stopped under the stars, but the administration never slept. Guards patrolled in rotations. Officers recorded pregnancies, births, and resistance, updating their ledgers with military precision. Each report would travel across the empire, feeding into a network that ensured every captured city contributed to the Mongol genetic legacy. The girls became both prisoners and tools, their lives measured in columns and figures, their pain reduced to statistics. Outside, the cities mourned. Families searched for daughters who had vanished, unaware that their names were already inked into ledgers far from their homes. Each disappearance was not isolated, but part of a continental network of surveillance, selection, and exploitation. The empire was expanding its territory and its genetic reach through a system that married violence to administration, terror to bureaucracy, leaving survivors and descendants to carry the scars for centuries. Fatima's world narrowed to the ledger's inked lines and the soldiers' cold eyes. The administrators had calculated every step, every body, every womb, but in that moment, something inside her snapped. She refused to be reduced to a number. As a soldier reached for her, she pushed, screamed, and ran, weaving through the tents with the chaos of survival driving her. Around her, other girls hesitated, then followed, and for the first time, the machinery of the empire faltered. The quills paused. The system, for a fleeting instant, was human again, shattered by defiance no ledger could contain. Fatima ran through the dust-choked streets of Bukhara, heart hammering, legs trembling under the weight of fear and newfound determination. The screams from the processing tent still echoed in her ears, mingling with the sounds of hooves and the low rumble of the Mongol encampment moving toward the horizon. Every alley, every shadow, every stray cart could hold death or deliver freedom. She could no longer count on mercy. Only movement and cunning could save her. The city itself seemed complicit, the walls once a sanctuary now offering no protection. Shops were shuttered and doorways were empty, but the faint whispers of sympathetic villagers guided her steps. A hand reached out from a narrow alley, a young man, himself trembling, but offering water and direction. They communicated in hushed tones, using gestures to avoid the ears of patrolling soldiers. Each person who aided her did so with risk, but the risk was worth it. They had seen too many daughters taken, too many mothers weep to remain idle. Fatima realized the enormity of what she had witnessed and survived. The ledgers, the quills, the detailed columns of human suffering, they were more than bureaucratic documents. They were evidence of an empire that had mastered atrocity. A machine designed not only to conquer lands but to weaponize bodies, lineage and DNA. The whispers of her ancestors' torment, of the thousands catalogued for breeding, clung to her skin as though she could not shed them. And yet, in surviving, she became a living testament to resistance, a human ledger that the Mongols could not fully control. By nightfall, she had reached the outskirts of the city, where the Mongol army's noise faded into the distance. She collapsed behind a grove of date palms, shaking, crying, but breathing. Freedom, even if temporary, tasted like iron and dust, bitter yet intoxicating. Her mind replayed the systematic cruelty she had seen. The quills that moved across parchment with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, the schedules of violation measured down to minutes, the ranking of women as if they were livestock rather than daughters, sisters, and mothers. Each calculated act, each ledger entry, was an attempt to erase individuality, to replace life with numbers, bodies with statistics. But survival is more stubborn than empire. Fatima's body still bore the mark of being chosen, catalogued, and observed, but her spirit for the first time was untracked. She vowed that if she could endure this, if she could outrun the shadow of history, she would carry the memory of every girl who had been listed in those ledgers. Each name became a story, each story a shield. She would remember Fatima al-Rashid, Yasmin of MV, the twins from MV, and thousands more. They would not vanish into statistical anonymity. Their suffering would be recorded in human memory, passed along by those who survived, whispered across generations. The following days were a test of cunning and endurance. Fatima moved through villages under assumed identities, hiding in caravans of merchants traveling east. She learned to read the signs of patrols, to navigate trade routes, to barter survival without exposing herself. The network of spies that had catalogued her now inadvertently became guides to her escape, as she observed their patterns, anticipated their movements, and used their knowledge against them. Her understanding of the system, cruel as it was, became her advantage. As she journeyed, the wider implications of the Mongol campaign became clear. She realized that the empire's most lasting conquest was not measured in lands or cities, but in DNA, lineage, and the scars carried in bodies and minds. 16 million men across the world, descended from a single line, were living evidence of the industrialized rape that had shaped their ancestry. She understood that history often sanitized these truths. Books spoke of conquests, battles, and kings, ignoring the systematic suffering of women who had been reduced to breeding stock. But she had lived it, seen it, and survived it. Her survival was not just personal, it was revolutionary. Fatima became a symbol to those she met along the way. Villagers whispered of the girl who had run from the Mongol administrators, who had seen the ledgers and defied them, who carried the weight of thousands yet refused to be crushed. Her tale spread like wildfire, mingling with other stories of resistance. Some dismissed it as legend. Others were inspired to defy, to hide, to sabotage. Small acts, yes, but each one chipped away at the infrastructure of terror that had been imposed upon their world. In the years that followed, Fatima documented her journey, her observations, and the mechanisms of the empire. She drew maps of administrative routes, described the mobile facilities, and catalogued the intelligence networks. She could not undo the past, nor erase the ledger entries, but she could ensure that no one would ever look at those quills and ledgers the same way again. Knowledge became a form of power, and her narrative a weapon of truth against the bureaucratic machinery of dehumanization. And yet, even as she told the story, she acknowledged the enduring shadow it cast. The genetic legacy, the invisible chains carried in the bodies of descendants, could not be undone. The trauma, though diffused over generations, remained etched in DNA and memory. Fatima understood that freedom was not just escape, but the recognition of this history, the bearing of witness, and the transformation of pain into vigilance.
She became an archivist not only of names and dates, but of lived experience, ensuring that humanity, not empire, was remembered.
By the time she reached the safety of distant lands beyond the Mongol reach, Fatima had changed irreversibly. The girl who had been catalogued, ranked, and reduced to numbers emerged as a chronicler, a guide, and a protector of memory. Her understanding of systems, once instruments of oppression, now allowed her to navigate, manipulate, and survive. She carried forward the lessons of resilience, turning terror into knowledge, suffering into advocacy, and survival into resistance. The empire would continue to expand, to conquer, to attempt to control, but Fatima's story, like the whispers of countless others, would endure. The ledgers could list names, quills could scratch statistics, soldiers could enforce cruelty, but memory, courage, and testimony were beyond their reach. Through her words, the girls catalogued in ink and blood were resurrected, their identities reclaimed. Through her journey, the world glimpsed the full scope of a crime that had been systematized, hidden, and sanitized, but never erased. The Mongol administrators, the ledgers, the quills, all instruments of industrialized horror, had underestimated one thing: the capacity for human resistance, memory, and survival. Fatima al-Rashid, once a name on a page, became a living archive of truth. She carried forward the stories of millions, ensuring that history would not forget, and that those who came after could understand both the horrors inflicted and the resilience that rose in their wake. And in that, there was hope, a reminder that even against the most calculated machinery of cruelty, humanity could endure, remember, and reclaim its dignity. The empire could leave marks on the body, but the spirit, when guided by courage and witness, remained unbroken.